Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. I will be presenting on my research, which is a comparative analysis on corruption between Muslim and Western countries. Religion has always played an important role in influencing individual attitudes and behavior in the societal, cultural, and political spheres. Religions such as Islam have a unique political advantage in comparison to their secular counterparts. Corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain and usually exists in the form of bribery. Corruption also encompasses nepotism and favoritism of certain public officials. The consequence of corruption is that it hampers democracy, economic prosperity, and perpetuates inequality and poverty. There are 198 countries listed in the Corruption Perception Index. Muslim majority countries such as Iraq, Somalia, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and Yemen were ranked at the bottom 20 of the index. Although these countries to a certain extent enact Islamic law, they are still considered extremely corrupt. Malaysia, which is a majority Muslim country that practices a dual legal system, which is civil law and Sharia law, was ranked 51 on the CPI index, which indicates that Malaysia is among the least corrupt Muslim countries. The Quran strictly prohibits any form of corruption. The term fasad or corruption and other words that have similar meanings to the word fasad have been mentioned in the Quran nearly 50 times. The word salah, which has the opposite meaning of fasad, is also mentioned in the Quran nearly 150 times. This indicates to the Muslim scholars is that the Quran promotes the value of transparency, integrity, and prohibits all types of corruption and mischief. In Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 11, it's mentioned, and when it is said to them, do not cause corruption on the earth, they say, we are but reformers. The Quran prohibits devouring or misappropriation of the property of others. In Surah An-Nisa, verse 49, and Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 188, which is a broad concept that subsumes such other offenses as fraud, hoarding, theft, and gambling. The Quranic injunctions also condemn those who are in positions of power who spread corruption among people through nepotistic practices and oppressing others, as in Surah Al-Qasas, verse 4, and Surah Al-Fajr, verse 10 to 12. Corruption in Islam is far-ranging. It encompasses not just bribery or rashwah, which refers to private gain from public office or seeking recompense from rendering duties ordinarily considered as non-compensatory, but also includes dishonesty, betrayal of trust, abuse of power, deceit in both private and public dealings, favoritism, and nepotism. Another form of corruption that exists is in the form of favoritism. An example of this can be seen when the son of an ulama would be given the same salary as his father. This occurred with a man named Sir Sa'datin. He was the teacher of Murad III, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, and later on became the Sultan's son's teacher. Due to the close relationship he had developed with the Sultan, he also became the Muslim Judge of Mecca. In order to consolidate their power, they would hire young and talented individuals and persuade them to marry with someone from their family. If the young person succeeded in grasping the attention of the high decreed officers, he will be assigned to an important position in the public office. Such was the practice of the corrupt officials in the past that led to the demise of the Ottoman Empire. Taking into consideration the fact that many citizens in Muslim majority countries are in favor of Sharia law, and many Muslim majority countries have implemented Sharia law, which of course doesn't allow corruption. So the question that needs to be posed then is, why are Muslim countries so corrupt? So there's three factors, which are political, cultural, and legal factors. First, we will look at the political factor. In a democracy, there exists competition between political candidates and political parties. This competition serves as a good way to combat corruption, as any act of corruption would hurt the reputation of candidates. Under the political factor that contributes to corruption is the type of system of governance. It has been widely acknowledged that some Muslim countries do not practice democracy. Some Muslim countries have adopted the monarchy system of governance, and this factor contributes to corruption in Muslim countries as royal prerogative give extensive, unaccountable power to the executive. Second factor would be legal. Another factor that contributes to corruption in Muslim countries is the lack of legal legislation pertaining to corruption. It is well known that public officials perform their duties in accordance with the set of laws and regulations in place. However, an absence of clear laws and procedures creates an environment for corruption to develop. It's important to note that although some Muslim countries, such as Pakistan, have tried their best to culminate efforts to combat corruption with formal legislations, countries such as Yemen are heavily entrenched in corruption. In Yemen, there was little government transparency and accountability even before the outbreak of the war in 2015. This is because there existed network corruption and patronage under the Ali Abdullah Saleh regime in public institutions. Other Muslim countries such as Iran, which ranked 148 out of 190 on the Corruption Perception Index, refused to comply with international efforts to combat corruption. It can be seen that Iran had been blacklisted by the Financial Action Task Force as of 2020. The failure to adopt the recommendations of FATF in their local legislations, such refusal to adopt recommendations to combat money laundering and terrorism financing would create an environment for corruption to thrive in Muslim countries. Third factor is cultural, and it has been found that a higher loyalty to the family has a correlation with higher levels of corruption in a country. This is because leaders prioritize their familial interests over the interests of their people. This is a form of many nepotism that exists in many Muslim countries that is ingrained in their culture. Strong familial values have a powerful influence in making a leader feel an intense sense of obligation to provide opportunities to their family. According to a study entitled How Islamic Are Islamic Countries by Rahman and Askari, it was found that Islamic countries perform poorly in adopting Islamic principles in their governance. It was found in the study that Muslim countries did not adhere to law and governance, human and political rights, as well as international standards. On an individual level, some leaders in Muslim countries often do not act inconsistent with religious practices and teachings that actively advocate against corruption, which was mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah. Transparency International Report 2019 has put many Western countries to be ranked well on the Corruption Perception Index. As a matter of fact, 14 out of 20 countries in the top 25 of the index are Western countries. These Western countries include Denmark, Finland, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Germany has enforced campaign financing laws since 1990s. Meanwhile, many other Muslim majority countries, as Yemen, Afghanistan, and Malaysia, have yet to adopt such laws. This shows a lack of political will on the part of these countries in the efforts to combat corruption. Transparency International further added that Western countries rank higher on the index due to stronger enforcement of campaign finance regulations. 2019 Democracy Index report compiled by the Economist Intelligence stated that Finland and Denmark have ranked 5th and 7th respectively on the index. In this index, countries are ranked according to the strength of the political culture, civil liberties, and pluralism of each country. Malaysia ranked 43rd on the list, which is considerably good. On the other hand, countries such as Libya and Saudi Arabia rank 156 and 159, which is extremely poor. So a comparison between Muslim and non-Muslim countries. Factor that contributes to lower levels of corruption in Western countries is that they have more transparent and comprehensive financial regulations that many Muslim countries do not adopt or have. These regulations may be effective in proving that public officials do not commit corruption on paper. Consequently, not showing up on the corruption perception index. In Western countries, if a public official merely discloses his financial statements and is transparent with his transaction, it's sufficient to render him scot-free of any corruption. This is because financial regulations in Western countries, such as the United States, have legalized this form of corruption under the revolving door policy, in spite of the fact that this will give rise to potential abuse of power and corrupt practices. The bar for corruption is much higher. There needs to be proof of communication between parties and concrete evidence that the vice president had abused his power in office by providing contracts to his former company. A mere conflict of interest is not enough to infer that a politician has been engaged in corrupt practices. Western countries are perceived as less corrupt on the Corruption Perception Index as they have created complex laws to circumvent their corrupt practices. It can be observed that although the acts of politicians are not defined legally as corruption, such legislation has given opportunities for Western countries to be engaged in institutional corruption. This goes undetected by the Corruption Perception Index has contributed to the high ranking on the reported index. The perception of corruption towards Muslim majority countries is higher due to the lack of campaign finance laws or the lack of legislation pertaining to political funding. Muslim countries, the bar for corruption is lower. This is because Muslim countries have not developed such complex regulations such as the revolving door policy. Muslim countries have a lot to develop in terms of law to deal with the issue of corruption. The fact that there exists law or no political will to combat corruption in Muslim countries give a bad perception, which reduces the ranking of Muslim countries naturally on the Corruption Perception Index. Moving forward, Muslim countries should aggressively update their laws, strengthen their democratic systems of governance, and put in effort in the betterment of freedom of media. Additionally, nepotism and kleptocracy should be strongly avoided, particularly by politicians in Muslim countries. They need to come closer to the teachings of Islam and to promote and upgrade a good image and reputation of Islam and Muslim in the eyes of their Western counterparts. Thank you for listening.